Hi, my friends, my dear friends. How are you guys?
Hey João, hey Norah,
Hey Daniel, hey John, John Peter.
John
John
Peter.
Peter.
So, guys, we're here for one more night of study about this amazing book, Paul and Stephen. We're very happy. We're in a very emotional part. The book is changing a lot. We're seeing loads of interesting facts about Saul of Tarsus, Stephen, Abigail. Um, Tonight, again, we're having a very harsh problems here in the state where I live in Brazil. So that in terms of climate change, we're having a couple of rains. They're very serious. Actually, Brazil is going through that type of problem, and my state is suffering with that as well. So that's why my camera is not open, okay? But I can hear my two great friends here, and I can talk to them, and we're gonna keep the program like that. We have loads of interesting things to talk about tonight. We're at a very nice point of the book, so we are anxious to start studying. Before we do that, our great friend Nora will bring us some prayers so we can get more calm, relaxed, and then we keep talking and studying the book properly. Okay.
All right, dear friends, let us jump gracefully into that vibration, asking our protector, our light, God, for blessings this evening or on demand as we study, that we receive messages of hope, of enlightenment. Thanking Chico, Manuel, and everyone here who continues to tell their story for us to learn. We ask everyone who is listening for a special blessing. And if there's some that have water next to them, that you also bless the water as we're studying together. That will say the Hail Mary prayer. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. And so be it.
Thank you so much, dear. Thank you. Beautiful prayer. So, guys, start talking about this amazing book. So last week we stopped in a very interesting conversation. We saw that after everything they had gone through, Sal went back to see Abigail and tried to give them, as a couple, one more chance. The almighty Sal Tarsus. However, it was too late. Abigail was already about to die. She told him that though she was convinced of the impossibility of her earthly happiness, she didn't feel sad. She added that Jesus was not an ordinary teacher of sorceries because he was thinking stuff like that. He was the Messiah. Jesus Christ was the Messiah, the giver of consolation and life. His influence had renewed her strength and had filled her with courage and true understanding of the supreme designs. Jesus' gospel of forgiveness and love was to her the divine treasure of the sufferers and the disheartened of the world. So pretty. Saul could not hide the anger spreading in his soul. And that's where we're starting tonight. It's really interesting, and I want to bring here tonight a couple of things that he thought and said, and a couple of things that she explained to him. So, in this part of the study, to begin, we're going to be more loyal and honest to the book. Okay, he said this always the same refrain. He was quite confused and he went on. Invariably, the affirmation that he came for the miserable, the sick, the unfortunate. But the tribes of Israel are not comprised only of these sorts of individuals. What about the valorous men of the chosen people and the families from respectable traditions? Would they be outside the influence of the Savior? So, this is a very interesting thing that he thinks because it's really interesting because we see that he was still very um, close to his pride and always pursuing this image of himself that he had created and that all of those friends of his had helped him to create. So he could not think of a Messiah that had came just for those miserable people, those sufferers. And he, being the intelligent, smart man that he was, he did this because he thought he would catch her and she would be without a response to have. But that's not what happened, because she said, I've read the teachings of Jesus. And Emmanuel tells us that she said this in a very firmly tone. She goes on, and I suppose I can understand your objections. In fulfillment of the sacred word of the prophets, Christ showed us that life is a collection of honorable concerns of the soul, enabling us to make our way toward God on pathways of righteousness. We mustn't conceive of the Creator as an idle, isolated judge, but as a watchful father who cares for his children. The valorous man who you mention, those unencumbered by infirmities and suffering, and who are in possession of real blessings from God, they should be his hardworking children, concerned with the result of the task they have been called to fulfill on behalf of their brother's happiness. Amazing mental attitude that she was bringing to him. She goes on, but in the world, against our higher inclinations, we are faced with enemies that have been installed in our souls. Selfishness attacks our health, and jealousy harms the divine command, just as rust and moths render our tools and clothes useless if we neglect them. This is beautiful. Few are those who remember the divine watch care during the happy days of abundance. Just as rare are those who work in spite of suffering. This shows that Christ is a way for everybody, a consolation for those who weep, and guide for discerning souls called by God to contribute to the holy concerns of the good. Sal was impressed by her clear reasoning. And we've seen that all those speech things, they were very he was very worried about that. They were very important to him. And he thought that that conversation demanded much effort from Abigail. And as we talked about last week, she was very ill and resulted in a great fatigue. Her breathing became difficult, and it was not long before blood began gushing from her chest in a prolonged hemoptysis. That suffering, adorned with tenderness and humility, both deeply touched and exasperated Saul. He understood that in front of his betrothed, it would be cruel to attack that Jesus whom he would persecute to the end. He did not want to believe that his Abigail was on the verge of death. He preferred to face the future with optimism. He said, Abigail, let's not speak any more of religious ideas. Forgive me. Let's remember our promising future and forget all else in order to gather our best hopes. His words bubbled with ardent emotion. The love he was displaying was a symptom of the repentance and the noble and sincere dreams that now labored in his afflicted spirit. However, as though seized by extraordinary weakness after the effort she had made, Abigail was languid, afraid of continuing the conversation because of the coughing fits that often threatened her. Her worried betrothed grasped the situation, and squeezing her transparent hands, he kissed them tenderly. You need to rest, he said lovingly. Don't worry about me. I'll give you my own strength. Soon you'll get well. He enveloped her in a look full of gratitude and infinite tenderness and said, I will come back to see you every night that I'm able to leave Jerusalem. And as soon as you can, we'll see the moonlight again in the garden so that nature may bless our dreams under God's eyes. Yes, Sal, she said slowly. Jesus will grant us what is best. Whatever may come, however, you will be in my heart always. It's really interesting, guys, because um, as we've talked here before, we see that these spiritist principles that are so important for us, when we go through Chico Xavier's psychograph books, we see that those first Christians, they were really into that type of principle. So we see here when we look to Abigail's mental attitude that she had changed a lot. She was full of hope that she would not die. She would just lose her physical body. That's what she was thinking. And we do see in her speech that she was already believing that they would um, still preserve their individual spirituality and their individual personality in terms of spirit after death. And we see in a couple of parts of her speech that she was already believing in reincarnation. The doctor of the law was about to say goodbye, but realized that his betrothed had said nothing with regards to her brother. This part is very interesting. The fulfillness of that silence struck him. He would prefer to be accused, to discuss the deed and its painful circumstances so that he could justify himself. But instead of reprimands, he had met with curses. Instead of reproach, a generous peacefulness in which the young woman was able to hide the deep wounds in her soul. This is very nice because, again, we see Abigail being a Christian. She is forgiving him, although she went through that an unspeakable moment of harsh things that she had to go through, seeing her beloved brother that she was waiting forever to come back to be killed, literally killed by her own fiance. Abigail, exclaimed Sal somewhat hesitantly, before I leave, I would like to know whether you have honestly forgiven me for Stephen's death. I've never been able to speak to you about the contingencies that led me to such sad ending, but I'm convinced that in your goodness you have forgotten my wrong. And she said, why are you bringing that up? And she was making an effort to keep her voice firm and clear. She said, my soul is at peace now. Jazel is with Christ, and he died bequeathing you a well meaning thought. How could I complain on my part if God has been so merciful to me? Look at this. This is so precious because we have seen here in this 12 weeks that we are studying this book all the tough things this girl has been through. And because she met Christ, she was seeing a God full of just and full of love for her. She goes on, even now I thank the righteous Father with all my heart for the gift of your presence in this house. For a long time, I have been asking heaven not to let me die without seeing you and hearing your voice once more. This is so beautiful. Sal measured the extent of that spontaneous generosity, and his eyes became moist. He said goodbye. The fresh night was full of suggestions for his spirit. He had never pondered more deeply the unfathomable designs of the eternal as at that moment when he had received such a profound lesson on humility and love from his beloved. Within his heavy soul, he was experiencing the clash of two opposing forces fighting each other for possession of his generous and impulsive heart. So this is very interesting because we see that he was not yet rendered to Jesus Christ, but he was already seeing two opposite forces fighting for his heart. He could not comprehend God except as a powerful and unyielding master. All human concerns bowed before his sovereign will. However, he had begun to search for the reason for his distressing uneasiness. Why was he unable to find anywhere the peace he so ardently desired? This is very significant because we know as Christians that that peace is in Christ. And yet, smiling and serene, those miserable people of the way were handing themselves over to the chains of prison. Infirm and sick individuals without any hope in the world bore his persecutions with praise in their hearts. Stephen himself, whose death had served as an unforgettable example, had blessed him with with had blessed him out of his love for the carpenter of Nazareth, for the torture he had received. Those helpless creatures enjoyed a serenity unknown to him. This is very nice. The picture of his ill betrothed remained before his eyes. Abigail was sensitive and affectionate, but he remembered her feminine anxiety and the intensity of her concerns as a woman when he was unable to appear punctually at the loving house on the road to Joppa. That this is very nice because we see here in this part of the book Emmanuel telling us that Saul was noticing that after Abigail met Jesus, she was completely different, and he was able to notice that unknown Jesus provided her heart with strength. If it was undeniable that the illness was extinguishing her life little by little, the rejuvenation of her spiritual energies was also obvious. His betrothed had spoken to him as if touched by new inspiration. Those eyes seemed to contemplate inwardly the landscape of other worlds. Again, another spiritist principle, multiple worlds. Such thoughts did not give him a chance to admire nature. As he entered Jerusalem, he had the impression he was awakening from a dream. In front of him appeared the majestic lines of the great temple. The pride of his race spoke more strongly to his spirit. So sad. It was impossible to confer any superiority on the people of the way. The sight of the temple was all it took for him to find within himself the understanding he wanted. In his opinion, the serenity of the disciples of Christ came, of course, from the ignorance that was their natural endowment. Generally speaking, those who were sympathetic to the Galileans were only individuals that the world had dishonored with physical decadence, lack of education, and extreme abandonment. A responsible man obviously could not find peace at such a cheap price. It seemed to him that he had solved the riddle. He would continue the fight. He was counting on the speedy recovery of his betrothed. As soon as possible, he would marry Abigail and would easily dissuade her from the perilous disillusions of those damnable teachings. From the ambit of his happy home, he would continue to persecute all those who would forget the law in exchange for other principles. These thoughts, in a way, calmed his worries. It's really interesting. Before I pass the word to Daniel, it's really interesting because we see that a man that could only see materialism and that find all his happiness in materialism, he found that transitory peace, that very fast peace that would soon go off in materialism. That's how he could feel a little bit calmer and better. Now I give the word to our good friend Daniel here.
Thanks, João. So we can see that this is a very dense chapter and full of subjects for us to discuss and study. So the next morning, Saul gets the terrible message from Zechariah that Abigail was dying, and he made his trip right away to Joppa. And just a curiosity, from Jerusalem to Joppa in a chariot, it would take 3 hours to accomplish this trip. So he would go really fast in with his chariot. So Saul went right away to Joppa, and once he was there, Ruth and Zechariah told him that she was throwing up blood in a way that they couldn't even understand. How could she still be alive, as if she was waiting to see Saul once more. It was shocking that in one day Abigail had uh, her vitality gone. Saul knelt by her side and kissed her hands, and Abigail could barely show some reaction, but she managed to understand that those tears in his face, in her fiance's eyes, were the sign of a new life. And once more, this is her ability to think, yet in the most difficult moments, she would have this clarity to perceive things and signs around her. She was he was a very severe and sturdy man who was weeping for the first time, unable to conceal the hermeneutics of human laws with that unbearable vision of an agonizing angel. So she could mutter, "Don't weep, Saul. That is not the end of it all." And Saul said in tears, "I want you with me for the rest of my life." So I have to read this part of the book for you because um, this is a very important speech from Abigail. She said, "And yet we must die in order to truly live." Jesus taught us that the seed falling onto the soil remains a seed only, but if it dies, it yields much fruit. Don't rebel against the supreme designs that are now taking me from your material life. If we had been united in marriage, perhaps would have much joy. We would have a home with our children. But shattering our hopes of temporary happiness on earth, God has multiplied our generous dreams. While we wait our indissoluble union, I will help you from wherever I might be, and you will consecrate yourself to the Eternal One in a sublime and redemptive endeavor. And this is already kind of uh, uh, foresee that she could have a foresight that she could have. She was talking about the future, and yet she was dying. She was losing her life. And Saul still could find courage to reply, "Who gave you such ideas?" Next, Abigail told him some very important things I'd like to read, but then I'd take all the time just for me. So I selected some of them to point out. First of all, she could see Jesus at that very moment. Sorry. Uh, and Jesus said to Abigail at that uh, at that same moment that Jesus trusts in Saul and has plans for him. Abigail would be taken to a spiritual world with already a job to do, and two implicit facts. That one is that Abigail was okay and fearless about dying, and she got better before her death. And this is a regular phenomenon to all of us in our most crucial moment. So came the final gasp, and she said, "Jesus is here to take me." Saul shouted to Zechariah and Ruth, and Abigail gave them her last tear, and heavy grief fell over the house on the road to Joppa. And Ruth brought some roses to cover her body. So we have so much to talk about this. After all, this is the phenomenon of disincarnation, And this is something that concerns to us all as humans, as spirits, as Christians. And so for now, we ended the chapter 9, and uh, our friend Nora will take the word.
Absolutely powerful. And, I know we have some programs that talk a little bit about like near death experiences, which is what we have for us that are here alive, right? As evidence, at least the closest where they start to see their beloved ones or they see a light, of course they come back. But it was a very emotional chapter. And for sure at the end, we will go back and talk a little bit more about that. I'm gonna add the slides. If they go on, they go on. If not, I'll just talk. Let me see. Oh, it did. Okay. So now Saul continued grieving. So he was in this grieving stage, and you know, he was pretty much at that part of like he was very angry. And it says here, Manuel describes him. He had bitter thoughts that were tormenting him with anguished regret. So as Daniel and João pointed out, the way that he treated Abigail, all of that was falling on his conscience now. That's what was happening, and in Saul's thought processing, he was very focused on the pain-filled coincidences that due to the crucified Christ whom he was unable to comprehend. So right now he's kind of thinking in that mentality. Every time I think of Jesus, it's all about suffering, right? In other words, so when we think of when somebody's not able to comprehend, using it kind of like he was not in that alignment. So when he's not understanding things, he's thinking in a very materialistic way, which is very different as right now Daniel and even Joan read those parts of how Abigail saw life after death, right? And so he says here, ever since the first controversy of the Church of the Way, he had not gone one day without meeting him, right, or Jesus, in the face of some passerby, in the reprehension of friends, in the official documents of his punitive actions, or on the lips of miserable prisoners, right? So he couldn't escape. In other words, this Jesus, the teachings, they were there everywhere he went. He couldn't, right? And it was in him. We know spiritism in his consciousness. So what we project where we're at, right? It was absolutely powerful to think of that. So then there's some comparisons here where he's still processing, right? He's like, Stephen died talking of Jesus with love and joy. And Abigail was able to find consolation in remembering Jesus and even exhorted Saul to follow him, right? As Daniel read those words to us. However, him himself, Saul, was not there yet. He said, I'm going to defend the law of Moses and so body and soul. That's what he said, because in that mindset that he said, Jesus was the one that inflicted the pain and the madness and the craziness. So then the chapter talks how Saul and Zechariah are having a huge conversation. Again, just like Daniel, we would love to read everything, but because of time, we just go in snippets. But in that conversation, unfortunately, Saul was using his pain to try to now blame Abigail's death. So who is doing this? Who is guilty of this? Okay. And so he was determined that it was Ananias, right? That it was him. His teachings of Jesus drove Abigail sick. He was determined, right? And this whole time, just for us to know, Zechariah was listening attentively, but he wasn't necessarily agreeing with Saul's thought processing as he was going. So so he says here, I thought about that myself, but our dear Abigail's mental attitude was clothed in immense consolation. After talking with the honest and humble hermit, or Ananias, Ananias always treated her with profound respect. He was always joyful in attending to her, and he never asked for any compensation whatsoever. So in other words, Ananias was very healing. There was nothing that he did wrong. As a matter of fact, it says here he was very, he was a friend to her and that helped her through the process, right? So Zechariah again is trying to tell Saul, think about this, okay? And so then Zechariah was very firm and questioned Saul. You know, Abigail made you the center of her affectionate interests. I was unable to understand why you vanished from our house, right? So he says, finding a remedy was providential. From the moment Ananias intervened, Abigail changed. Though ill, she welcomed every beggar who came to talk to her about Jesus, right? Whom I also don't understand. But in my clear conscience, I feel I'm justified because I know I fulfilled my duty, not by not hindering resources she felt necessary for her consolation. So Zechariah too was a loving father, right, who saw those changes and he didn't stop that. So as a side note, like what a beautiful parent, right? He didn't question it. He was focused most more on the healing, even though he himself was like, who is this Jesus? But he was looking at those beautiful outcomes. Saul was listening to him, but was he really listening? That's why I put here was he heard, but did he really listen? Because even though Zechariah talked beautifully about Abigail's journey and the healing, he says, I need to find Ananias and I need to punish him. And Zechariah continued to object. He says, no provision that authorizes one to punish evildoers exists, right? But we know Saul, he gets his way, right? And then he says here, which was very powerful, in the simplicity of my rural life, I cannot comprehend the religious battle in Jerusalem. In the end, however, there are problems inherent to your professional duties, and I must not get involved in the decisions that may be appropriate. So we know I'm not much of a history buff, but maybe João and Daniel, they might bring in this in the conversation. But there was a lot of this there, and there continues to be a lot of this religious battles in and it's already embedded in there. But Zechariah was like, this is something that you need to handle, not me, even though I'm giving you advice, go on and do what you need to do. And so Saul started looking for Ananias desperately, right? They ended up capturing someone in the movement, right? Mattathias Johanan. And Saul was like asking the soldiers, hey, let's get him. And he starts to talk to him. Tell me what you know about Ananias, where his whereabouts, right? And he was like, I don't know anything. So Saul uses fingernail torture. It was a very ugly description, but it was interesting because when um, Mattathias was bleeding and in pain, and he was yelling, have mercy on me, have mercy on me, I'll tell you. Saul stops, right, and says, okay. And that's where we ended. So um okay, so these are questions for us to think about, as now just a conversation. So am I willing to have Abigail's faith until the end? So we look back, Abigail, even though she was dying, she's had that perception of life. She was at peace with herself. Can we do that? The next question we can ask ourselves, how do I deal with loss? We see Saul losing Abigail, and he's wanting to blame, he's wanting to find a materialistic cause, he's not accepting what is happening, right? Maybe because his conscience is heavy, he knows what he did. So when we lose someone or something, an experience, whatever it is, how do we handle it? I think this is just food for thought for us. The next question we can ask ourselves, can I listen to God's signs to get answers? Because that conversation between Saul and Zechariah, that was very important for him. Yet it's almost like a sign, don't do it, Saul. Just get out of that already, man. Just stop. Just quit it. And sometimes we think we want our answers like God coming before us, and sometimes we do get our answers through other ways, conversation, or maybe we read something, a thought, a memory, and yet, are we going to be like Saul, insistent, or can we listen to those things? And the last point is, if I don't get what I want, will I resort to violence? Think about Saul. He's not getting what he wants. And yet, I know nowadays our society's evolved, so we don't use torture or any of that. But, are we gaslighting? Are we making people feel guilty? Are we controlling people? Are we manipulating? Are we using emotional abuse? What are we doing when we don't get things what we want? Right? Can we let go of that? I think, can we be at peace of letting go? And so, how is Jesus our ultimate therapy, or the teachings? Because that's what it's happening in this whole chapter, right? Bringing it back to that spiritism. How can I see that in me? And we see that Abigail has taught us that Jesus is not a religion, but an experience. Everything about her in her growth, in her journey of that life, is an experience. So we need to go inside ourselves and say, okay, how am I going to experience this Jesus? And we're all so unique. But to end it off, it really is about this Christianity, right? Which was beautiful, how we are all synchronized, João, talking about the being Christians and spiritists. In the Bible, Philippians 2, a whole chapter is entitled Imitating Christ's Humility, which is what we're learning. To have that Jesus experience, we need to be in that vibration, right? So we can't read the whole thing, but we're going to try reading this part because it's so beautiful. It says here, verse 13, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. And then verse 14, do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky. How beautiful to be these Christians, right? Um, as you firmly hold to the world of life, and then I will be able to boast on the day of Christ that I did not run on labor in vain. But even if I'm being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you, so that you too shall be glad and rejoice with me. So, in these letters of the Philippians, imagine if we are in that brotherhood or sisterhood with one another, encouraging each other to be these kind of Christians. Wouldn't things be different? Anyway, this is food for thought. It was very emotional, and to see Abby. So let me remove this so we can talk. Anyway, that's my part, friends. I don't know.
So sorry, I was trying to open my my microphone here.
I was
So sorry, it took too long. I was trying here. I was clicking on the button. Guys, we have very interesting reflections here. Um, the one that I want to bring here is for us to talk about the reasons why Abigail was feeling how she was feeling, although she was facing death. And since this is a study, I want to bring two questions from the Spirit's book here. Okay, that are very important. So, question 164. Kardec asks the superior spirits, do all spirits experience the trouble? And here he's talking about that feeling that loads of people go through while they are facing death, to be afraid of the unknown, to be trouble in their hearts. So do all spirits experience that confusion, that trouble that follows the separation of the soul and body to the same degree and for the same amount of time? The superior spirits answered, no, it depends on how evolved they are. Those who are already purified are almost immediately self aware because of their detachment from matter during corporeal life. However, carnal individuals with impure consciences retain the impression of matter much longer. So we see here that she was feeling like that because she was a purified spirit, because we've seen through all those difficult things that this girl has gone through, we see that she never attached that much of matter to to those material things of earth. And as we've seen here, she could have big eyes for Sau's richness or for her beauty. She could get really attached to all of that, but she didn't. And here, Kardec asks the spirits a very interesting question. And although we've talked about here that spiritism is the third revelation, but as we know, when Jesus came, he professed loads of spiritist principles, and Kardec himself tells us that being a spiritist means being a Christian, an honest, a just Christian. So Kardec asks in the question 165, he asks this: does an understanding of Spiritism have any influence on the shorter or longer duration of this confusion? And again, before I read the answer that the superior spirits brought, it's interesting for us to analyze here that she had gone through a truly course with Ananias. She studied a lot with him, so she was taught about all those spiritual principles that we can call a bunch of them spiritist principles. So here's the answer. It has a very considerable influence because the spirit understood what its situation would be beforehand. The practice of good and purity of conscience exerts the most influence, however. At the moment of death, everything appears confused at first. The soul needs some time to recognize itself. It feels dazed, so sorry, like someone walking out of a deep sleep who tries to understand the situation. The lucidity of its ideas and the memory of its past return as the influence of the matter from which it has just freed itself is extinguished, and the sort of fog that had obscured its thoughts is dissipated. The duration of the state of confusion following death varies greatly. It may last few hours, several months, or even years. The ones who experience it for the least amount of time are those who have identified themselves with their future state during life because they immediately understand their position. This confusion presents particular aspects depending on the character of the individual and especially depending on the type of death involved. Then the spirits bring another perspective that is not the case for us here. But it's really interesting because we see that Abigail was a person with a very pure heart, and we see that she was not attached to those material things of earth. That's why she was feeling how she was feeling. And it's really interesting because we see that we have a very scientific, because Spiritism is also a science, a very scientific explanation to all of that. So this is beautiful. And when we look at her, at a person, and Nora brought this reflection for us, like what should we be thinking about ourselves when when we look to those characters from this book? When we look to a girl like that had gone through all those difficult things, and we look to ourselves, we see that if we pay attention and if we give credit to the evil part of the world, to those evil persons, we can suffer a lot. This is not a threat or anything like that. This is a reality, a scientific reality. Nora and I, we have been through loads of Andre Luis books, and he tells us, Andre Luis is another spirit that dictated books through Chico Xavier, and he tells us that 1 minute that we pay attention on those evil parts of the world can render us and may cost us centuries for us to get back to reality, to get back to our normal path of evolving as spirits. Do you guys want to say something? So sorry, I'm taking too long today. So sorry, guys.
Ladies first.
Actually, I think you all nailed it. It was very rich, and I think just taking everything in. But I do like, it's so beautiful to have the spirits cross reference, right? To have ourselves too in this experience, to try to see, well, what can I extract from what I'm reading, and to make ourselves questions. And we all take something so beautiful with us, and and every every being here in this story was so important. Even Saul, he might not be the most enlightened one yet, right? But yet his role in this whole story is so important for us too. We follow him, we see his progress too. There were, he really loved Abigail, and so that's already there. That just feeling love is a huge component of already going in that path, of the Christian or spiritist path. So you know I was sad that Abby had to go, but you know it
Yes,
was
it's
a
very
beautiful
sad,
story. I was like,
very
no, come
emotional.
on,
Yes,
girl,
very sad.
we're gonna make it. Remember, I hadn't read the, but I was like, oh, but it was beautiful. Thanks. Daniel.
So I think this is uh, so much things, but um, it's important to point out that how we end up our journey is planned, just like every mission or expiation we have to our lives. So before we born, we come to our mother's womb. Um, the most important aspects or experiences for our incarnations are very well planned, and so is the end of that journey. How we uh, leave our bodies behind is truly important in every moment in experience counts. So it's so interesting that when we study Spiritism, life becomes full of unveiled facts, like things that were hidden among material experiences and so much knowledge about the world. And when you study something about spirituality, you can open your eyes and notice phenomenal things that happens every day, you know. Um, about the scientific principle that João mentioned, um, I would like to say that Spiritism doesn't bring all the answers to that matter, but it shows the way to conceal spirituality and science. Uh, Spiritism is shows it gives a hint, like somebody opens a door just a little bit so you can see that there's a way you can follow and reach a great objective for all humankind, which is conceal those two subjects, spirituality and science. And it's so great. It's one of the reasons that made me love this doctrine. That's it. Thank you, guys.
Oh, we thank you. I thank you both. So we are close to our time here. I have nothing else to say at this point of the book. Next week we're full of amazing parts to talk about as well. I want to ask you guys before we close here if you guys want to say something else before we finish.
Just thank you. It was beautiful as always to study together. Thank you.
Good week to everybody. Thank you, guys,
Yes.
for being here. It has
Me
been a
too. Me
great
too. I
experience.
I just want to thank you both, my great friends here. I'm really, really grateful. This book is very emotional. Again, I say this because it really is. It's a very emotional book, a very emotional story, a true story, and that really touches our hearts. I want to thank everybody that's here with us. I'm receiving the messages you guys are sending. Thank you so much. We're gonna be here next week. And all our studies, they will be here, as Vanessa always says, forever. As long as Facebook and YouTube channels exist, our studies will be here. Everything that we are talking about here about Paul and Stephen are being saved here in all those platforms that you guys can see, all those YouTube channels and all those Facebook pages. Okay, thank you guys one more time. See you guys next week. I really enjoyed. Thank you so much. Okay, see you guys next week.
Bye, guys.